Hi, I'm Michael Fitzgerald. I'm a contributing editor at MIT Sloan Management Review. And I'm here today to lead a discussion about how a traditional business can use new technology to transform itself and create a new business model. I'm with some executives who work for Entervision, which is a Spanish language media company in the US. It operates television stations, radio stations, and web media properties in a variety of US markets. It's about a $223 million business right now on an annual basis. And like any broadcast company in the developed world, it is being buffeted by technological change. Its audiences are fragmenting, its advertisers are consolidating, and it's not perhaps as bad as the newspaper industry, as if anything could be, but it is nonetheless feeling the pressure of technology on its business. And about 3 years ago, the executives decided that they had an opportunity to be not just a media company, but also a company that provided insights into the Latino market in the US, which is 54 million people strong and has about $1.5 trillion in annual purchasing power, and also happens to be the fastest growing demographic within the United States. So they were looking, in effect, at taking analytics and building an entirely new business within their business. And so with me today to talk about how Entervision was able to execute on this new business unit are Walter Ulloa, who is the co-founder and executive chairman, as well as the CEO of Entervision, and Franklin Rios, who is the president of Luminar, the analytics division that Entervision started. Walter and Franklin, thank you for being with us today. Walter, I want to ask you the first question. What led you to decide you needed a big data startup?
It started with an article I read about 3 years ago, I think in The Economist, that was talking about the transformation of the advertising business and how it was going to move away from being a qualitative business to a quantitative business, and that math scientists were going to become play a much more important role in the advertising industry.
When you read this article, how did you start thinking about, well, what is this going to mean for my broadcast business if we're going to start using a more quantitative approach?
I'd been reading a lot about the declining subscription base of newspaper and how their business was transforming, and then the introduction of Pandora and Spotify and these different businesses that were digital, but that were starting to engage more and more with the public in terms of their music listening, time. And then obviously television, so I started to see the change in television and what might happen to it. So it was all these different forces coming together that caused me to think more and more about big data and the evolution of how we, as consumers, how we engage with media. And then about that time, Franklin and I had a meeting, and we'd been talking together for a few years about doing something, but our focus is the Latino consumer and business insights around the Latino consumer. So immediately we started talking about how there was really this big gap between general market and the Latino consumer, and how there weren't any companies yet that had focused on our industry.
So Franklin, as Walter said, you guys had a conversation, a kind of crucial conversation 2-3 years ago. What do you remember of that conversation? How did it come about?
When I approached him, I had the thought of, I've been doing all the things in the general market, data, and anything has to do with consumer insights, but that discipline was not applied to the Latino consumer. And the Latino consumer in the U.S., as you mentioned earlier, represents $1.5 trillion of purchasing power. We're 18% of the U.S. population, but we only get 6% of the total marketing pie as an audience. So there is a disparity, and the reason why that had not occurred is because marketers, whether you're a consumer packaging goods company, a big retailer, or what have you, they can only count with qualitative data, qualitative information that is highly sampled. So in order for them to achieve growth, they need to know information not just at the DMA level or the local market level, but at the store level. What's happening at around a 1, 3, and 5 mile radius of my store? Not using sample data, but using empirical data.
And this data didn't exist at that point in time? It wasn't being gathered?
Well, the data exists. but the data was not properly being aggregated, was not properly being analyzed. It was not being analyzed by Latino mathematicians and data scientists that were able to interrogate the data in a culturally relevant manner.
And so, did you approach Walter and say, I think we should have a conversation, I think there's an opportunity here, or was this
Yeah.
a more random meeting?
Well, I always took the initiative of contacting Walter every 2 years and saying, Walter, what are you up to? And he would talk about his business, and he would graciously, get together for about an hour and a half every 2 years, and we would brainstorm about what's happening, what I was up to, etc. And I came to him with the thought of, I think there needs to be this discipline applied to the U.S. Latino consumer in order to help companies achieve growth. And at that point, Walter, being the entrepreneur that he is, he started thinking about the possibilities. I said, Franklin, let's start looking into this.
So he had all these experiences, and we had been looking for something to do together, and a couple of times we tried, but just didn't come together. And then, we sat down again, and we've been friends for many years. And so we started talking about his latest experience and how he thought there was an opportunity to create a business around Latino consumer insights. And I became very interested in what he had to say, and I said, you know what, maybe there's something here. Just finished reading about how the advertising business was going to transform itself, and I started to look at how more and more media was becoming fragmented. And so looking for the opportunity, and also the fact that the information that could be gathered using big data and data scientists to analyze that data around the Latino consumer was probably the future.
So a lot of companies that end up trying something radically different outside of their business
Right.
model usually are doing it out of desperation, or
Right.
what the jargon would be the burning platform.
Right.
Did Entervision have a kind of burning platform situation?
We don't have the burning platform situation like maybe newspaper, the Latino market population in the United States continues to grow, by leaps and bounds. Last 3 census, over 50% of all the population growth in the United States is because of the Latino population, and that will continue, as we go forward here into the next 30 years, whatever.
So your demographics are strong, you're having
Yeah,
natural
right,
growth,
right.
you're not in a kind of desperate situation?
We're not in a desperate situation, no. But I was looking out, into the future and going, gee, we're not starting to see the kind of changes in the television business yet, but it's going to happen, right? Particularly if you look at the internet as a way of distributing content, which more and more that's becoming part of our lives, right?
What did you have to do to convince the board, given that the fundamentals were still pretty strong? You're a public company. We all know public companies run quarter to quarter and they don't care about the future. Did you have to do a hard sell on your board to say, let's start Luminar?
The board was very supportive. The board was looking for new ideas. They also we talk a lot about the fact that media is changing and that we need to be looking for new growth drivers in our business here as we go forward, and that nothing really is sacred, and the way we are distributing television content today may not be the way it's distributed 10 years from now. And so what as a company are we going to do to be ahead of that change?
This is a big shift, though, Franklin. I mean, did you have concerns about trying to bring this kind of business, analytics business, into a traditional broadcaster?
Well, yes and no. No, because I know the broadcast business, because that's my root, that's my first love, so to speak, right? I started my career in broadcast, so I knew that there was a necessity from the part of a broadcast company to get more empirical, to get more quantitative. Yes, in the sense of this is a sea change in the company. It's some folks said this is not in the company DNA. We don't think data. We don't think analytics, and so it would take quite a bit of social capital to try to implement the thought process and try to have people come on board into what this could be. But the most important thing, though, one of the reasons why I approached Walter with this idea before anyone else, is the fact that I wanted to be associated with a company that is all things Latino. that has a focused and a deep vertical focus into the Latino consumer. Because all of a sudden, you're not creating a whole new business unit with something that completely doesn't make sense with the customers that you're ultimately serving, right? Entervision ultimately serves the Latino consumer, right? To get a message to the Latino consumer. So having that strong affinity, that strong relevance to the Latino consumer as it relates to Luminar was very important.
Would there not have been other companies operating in the North American market, though, that you could have, it also would have met that focus on Latino consumers?
There may be, but Franklin and Entervision had a relationship, a friendship, and as Franklin pointed out, I mean, what we do every day is serve the Latino consumer, and so the bridge between what he wanted to do and what he kind of saw as the future and what we do wasn't that great. I mean, I'm not saying there wasn't some, not apprehension, but certainly challenges into building the business and launching it.
Was there a point, Walter or Franklin, where you thought this might not happen? Did you have to, for instance, apply some extra sort of management muscle to make sure this was going to start?
Going in into this new business unit, I had the attitude of, or took the attitude of, well, I don't know where this is going to take us, but we're going to learn something along the way. I've never been adverse to risk, and I know that in order to create something, you're going to have to take some risk to get there. And I figured, well, okay, maybe we'll go down this path of building a business around, Latino consumer insights and big data and how you apply and analyze big data to drive growth for companies that are looking to achieve growth in this multicultural society that we live in today. And I said, but along the way, not everything we do is going to work, and we may wind up making a left turn instead of a right turn. But we're going to learn something, and the way that media continues to evolve and change is, this will benefit us in the long term.
But Franklin, I mean, for you, why not do Luminar as a sort of startup, a separate startup, rather than attaching it to an existing company in a field that doesn't automatically translate into consumer research?
It was a matter of two things, and the way that I thought about it was, be a startup, you're always looking for your second round of funding, always, right? And being a startup, you have to create credibility in the marketplace in order for companies to notice you as a serious company, as a company that is here to stay. So there were two very important components that I wanted to completely not even have to encounter. So the fact that Luminar is part of a publicly held company that is a Latino-focused company, right? And the fact that Walter had committed to the funds to not just launch the business, but also funds for growth. Then all those three components were already taken care of, right? Because when we have conversations with consumer packaging goods companies or retailers, and they ask us, well, tell us about Luminar. We're part of Entervision, a public company. So any kind of doubts about our stability, our long-range plans, or anything of the sort go away, because we're part of a serious company that is a Latino-focused company.
Did you have anybody, Walter or Franklin, who would say to you, well, NBC's not doing this with general consumers, or ABC, or CNN for that matter. I mean, Fox News doesn't do this kind of thing. Did people sort of say, this is we can't get our heads around why you're doing this?
I think for the most part, I mean, this is all new to a lot of people, right? And so to say that we're going to build a business around business intelligence as it relates to the Latino consumer is something new, but it's not so different, because that's what we do, right? We every day we get up, we suit up to serve the Latino consumer and to bring advertisers and marketers together and connect them with the Latino consumer. So this was all kind of part of the overall plan.
So Franklin, take us back to day one. It's April 2012. Is this a man in his desk? How'd you start?
Well, there were two men and two desks. Yeah. Okay. One of the first people that I asked to come on board is a person that I've known for many years, Oscar Padilla. He's a very bright guy, but has a very digital background.
Digital or analytical?
No, digital. Okay. Digital, and the reason why is because when the conversations that I had with Oscar, as I was having the conversation about starting this business, was Oscar, big data, and is the intersection of traditional digital and everything coming together in order to find out what's going on, in order to truly, get the signals out of the data that tells you something. And that really got him excited, right? So it was that. And then it was the process of starting to find data scientists and mathematicians that are in culture and in language. So exactly, a niche within a niche, right? So therefore, we started also reaching out. Entervision already had a support team for digital services in Argentina and also in Mexico. So I started tapping into that network of folks in Argentina and Mexico and started putting some fillers out in order to find who the right people would be in the countries that would be interested in doing something like this. So next thing we know, we're having conversations with applied mathematics people in Mexico. We're having conversations with heavy analytical professionals in Argentina. And just one thing led to another.
So you're able to draw from across Latin America and the kind of scientific resources that are there and how many people now are working in your unit?
In Argentina, we have about 10 folks working full-time in Luminar business, and they all came on board to be part of Luminar, including technology and mathematicians, data scientists, business intelligence folks. And then in Mexico, we have a smaller group. We have a group of 5. But it's still, they're cranking away at the math.
So you were not exactly welcomed with open arms by all of your new colleagues at Entervision. How did you win over people like the CFO and the head of sales? Well,
the CFO, there's one thing that every good CFO wants to see, and that is revenue. So that's the only way to win any CFO, right? Anything you can put on paper, anything that you can say, this is what the future looks like, the CFO's job is to say, well, you have to show me. Right. So when the revenue started coming in, that's when the CFO started getting excited about.
But that took a little longer than you thought it was going to take.
It certainly did. It certainly did, and mainly not because the value proposition was the wrong value proposition. We had to adjust our messaging. At the beginning, we started with a very technically centric message to the marketplace. Big data, analytics, et cetera, and the marketers were looking at us like, how does that connect to my business? So we had to then, through an advisory board that we put together, we started then shifting the conversation, not from a technology conversation, to an insights conversation.
So you pulled together some outside advisors, kind of separate from the board of directors, or?
That is correct, yeah. And that was very important. We have an advisory board that comprises of people from the industry, that comprises people from the technology industry as well, and comprises folks from the analytical world.
How did you get the head of sales to decide that he liked what you were doing? Tell me that story, Franklin.
The best way to get to the head of sales is through their best account executives that get excited about what we can provide them with, right? Because it's all about internal word of mouth and building social capital from within the organization in order to have those early adopters in the organization that can spread the DNA and contaminate in a good manner the rest of the organization. So by the time that I was able, we were able to convince the head of sales, he had already heard from half a dozen of his top performers of how we were able to go into a meeting with he or she and be able to completely change the conversation from a media conversation to an audience conversation. Okay, not just a channel conversation, but an audience. This is what the audience is like. This is how they're behaving. This is what they're doing.
So it took him 8 months to make his first sale, and I think he told you it was going to take 1 month. How did you kind of cover for him for 7 months?
I had kind of said to myself, I'm going to give this a year, and then we'll see where we're at, right? And so, and I knew that he was working hard to try to make it, to get some traction. Sales or revenue was coming in a little slower than we had planned. That wasn't too surprising, right? Having started businesses before, knowing how it takes a little longer sometimes than you expect.
When you started Luminar, was Luminar in your mind similar to when you started investing in your digital business a few years before that, or was Luminar kind of more R&D for Entervision?
It's interesting question. Luminar, it was a change certainly, and a lot of people looked at it like, wow, this is interesting. Where's this going to take us, right? But with some skepticism. But I mean, when we started our digital unit 5, 6 years ago, that was much tougher because digital was still very early, and it still is, and the fragmentation in our industry really hasn't it started, but it's not fully. We haven't seen the full fragmentation, I think, that we're going to see as we go forward. So there was a lot of skepticism around just the launch of a digital business, and then there's always politics you have to deal with along the way, and so that to me was harder than actually launching Luminar.
Describe briefly what fragmentation would look like in a broadcast business.
For me, fragmentation is, traditionally, I think all of us sitting here grew up with, with us, in our case, it's 5 or 6 broadcast networks, but when we include Univision and other Spanish language broadcasters, but certainly the big 4 in English, and that's what I grew up watching, right? And then of course then that evolved into a cable service or satellite service, which expanded the amount of content that you could engage with. And now I think we're now moving into even a much bigger world of content, where you have all the services that cable and satellite offer. You've got platforms like YouTube, right, which a lot of young people spend their time watching.
My kids are all the time on YouTube.
Instead of traditional networks, be they cable or be they broadcast. And so that the internet is just changing, or digital is changing everything so fast in terms of media.
And frankly, Walter just sort of brushed the politics aside, these politics, they come up. Can you talk about your experience of internal politics when you came in? Were there things that sort of you had to overcome that you would sort of say were political struggles inside?
When you start talking to folks about something that is abstract, like analytics and big data and consumer insights, people look at you like you have 2 heads, right? And as you start aggregating the data and you start building up the expense to build the right technology infrastructure and to bring in the data and to start aggregating the data and license the data in order to be able to interrogate something, right? The first internal hurdle I had to overcome and my team had to overcome was our own research department from within Entervision, when they were saying, well, we have been using the same tools for the last 20 years. They're highly qualitative tools, sample data tools, self-reported diary tools, and it's been working. So why should we be looking at something different? So the challenge that we had at Luminar was not to tell them that they were wrong, but it was to show them that there was something better, that there could be something better, and with their input and with their industry knowledge combined with what we could bring in on the analytics, that we could create something a lot significantly robust. At the end of the day, for internal buy-in, it had to be about how can the local salesperson, because we're a hyper-local company, right, by nature, Entervision, how can a local salesperson have better information about their customer that no one else has, and be able to also close the loop about the performance of what he or she is talking about, and have that credibility alongside that.
As we were launching Luminar, we were also restructuring our business, and that created, that was disruptive. So then you've got that happening, and then you've got Luminar being launched, and people going. I'm sure it probably never got to me in a substantial way, but certainly there were people that were skeptics and didn't know where this was headed. And we continued. By the way, we continued to transform our business. We're much more 360 in how we approach our advertisers. We're trying to present them with solutions on how they can grow their business by using all of our media, and then that focuses entirely on the Latino consumer.
And so the struggles he was having with research was not stuff that was bubbling up to your level. The research head wasn't coming in saying, "What's this guy doing?"
Whatever challenges he had with the research, at the same time we were reorganizing research, and we were changing research from the term to a business that we now refer to as business intelligence, and so just that change alone was different. I don't think people like change. It creates fear, right? So he had to deal with that as well, and then we were reorganizing research, now business intelligence, in terms of how we wanted it to structure it, and then of course Franklin with his unit was becoming more integrated with the business intelligence, which has been a very positive thing. In fact, I listened to a presentation yesterday on from the business intelligence group and around a new product that we're launching, and I was very impressed with the presentation, but also what was even more impressive for me was how the head of our business intelligence unit, how he has engaged with all this technology and new information, and how he's so excited and reinvigorated or rejuvenated, in terms of how he looks at the business.
Franklin, Luminar recently passed its first anniversary. What would you say have been your milestones?
There have been some internal milestones and there have been some client-facing milestones. One of them being is the amount of data we have been able to gather that results into having greater insights and more signals in the data that are telling us things as we approach a consumer packaging goods company or retailer. Milestone, of course, is always sales, right? That's one of the most important milestones, to be able to bring in revenue, to bring in clients, and to bring in clients that are asking for more. So another significant milestone is the fact that clients are saying, we like what you just did, we want more. So there's a continuing evolution of the relationship that we're building with clients and becoming a lot more integral into their decision-making process. Because as an analytics company, we are talking at the strategy level, at the consumer insights level, and therefore, the conversations are more about what's happening, how can I grow this business, what would a 1% lift look like in a particular market, and how does that translate into sales and revenue, and how does that hit the bottom line of the company. So, I would say it's all about the team, the people, having the right people, asking the right questions, and performing the work is just as important. So being able to hire the talent that we have has been another significant milestone.
Walter, how has Luminar in its youthful history changed Entervision?
In many ways, but certainly just to name a few, I mean, one of the things that Luminar's given is more insight into the use of data and technology within our existing business. For example, we're using a product called Tableau, which Luminar introduced us to better measure our sales flow, revenue flow, and that's been terrific. In fact, I said in a meeting yesterday, and we were just looking at the sales history of many of our sales executives, and seeing, getting a better picture of what that looks like, and who's performing, who's not performing, and why, right? And so that has been very helpful, and I know that we're also now looking at as not only as using this particular product in revenue forecasting and measuring, but also on the expense side, and looking at how expense is growing, and should it be growing, and do we need to redeploy people in a different area. So I not so sure that just this product alone would have been available to us had we not launched Luminar. And the way we've transformed our business intelligence unit, certainly Franklin and his team have had a lot to do with that. This new product that we're launching, which is going to give us some better insights into the Latino consumer, is a combination of traditional, research and this new world that we're continue to move into, and using more technology to better understand the behavior of Latino consumers.
So Walter first, and then Franklin. What would you tell other executives about using data and analytics to change the way they do business? What do they need to know to start?
I think every media company now needs to have a Luminar inside of it. I just don't see how you can go forward into this new digital world and not have this kind of a unit operating within the company. And not only does it create a more efficient core business, but it also it's going to help you grow in the future. And measuring how consumers behave and trends and how they consume is only going to become more complex, and you have to have the tools to be able to analyze all this data that one can access today. In the past, we were more reliant on companies that provided us with information, Nielsen, Arbitron, Scarborough, Polk, which is and a number of services that we use, and we still use those services, but and we have a team of what we referred to as in the past as research to look at this information and data and analyze it and then turn it into sales and tools and materials to support our revenue team.
Well, frankly, it sounds like, in a way, Luminar is Entervision's Nielsen, or something like that.
Well, I would say it's the transformation and the evolution of traditional qualitative into quantitative, right? Because traditional companies that provide some type of research on the Latino consumer based it on sample data or self-reported diaries or surveys, and the universe that they usually cover is in the neighborhood of between 30 and 50,000 Latino adults. So if you look at the Latino consumer in the US, 55 million, right, of which around 23 million are adults, it's not a very good representation of the consumer as a whole, right? It's a narrative, but it's not a very good directional, strategical way of looking at your business, especially when you're looking for growth. The low-hanging fruit in the US Latino consumer space has been picked. Therefore, people need to reach higher with deeper insights in order to be able to connect to those consumers. And so on the Luminar data store, we have 15 million Latino adults with transactional records from 2,000 sources. So we're covering 65% of the entire Latino adult population and their transactions.
How much revenue can it generate? I mean, is this going to become a business that at some point becomes a substantial part of, it becomes sort of a separate breakout on your earnings reports?
You know, I think that this business could become 10% of our total revenue within the next 5 years or less.
Total revenue today, or total revenue as it's growing?
Well, our total revenue today is about 223, 224. Could it be 20 million or more in the next 5 years? Yes.
One of the things that we talk about, or that we see frequently, is if the CEO is not clearly and consistently behind one of these kinds of efforts, they tend to really struggle and often fail. So in your case, did you actively have to call on Walter's support to kind of make inroads? Would this have worked if Walter wasn't providing support?
I think ultimately what made this work is the fact that the Luminar team, was able to build social capital from within the organization and within the executive team of the organization in order for me not to have to go to Walter and say, Walter, I need help. What I went to Walter with was, I need more time. That's what I went to Walter for.
I think your point, Michael, is correct, though, in any company, and that is that in any new endeavor within the organization, the CEO has to give its support, and if the people within the organization seeing that support starting to falter, then that's a problem for this new the launch of this new business. And so I tried to give Franklin the support that I felt he needed. He's a strong executive, so there was no hand-holding, certainly, but to give him the support and more importantly the confidence that I felt he was working diligently with his team, that he had a good team that he had brought in, and that just continue down the path you're going, and we're going to get there. Wherever there is, we're going.
And so how much of your time, Walter, were you actually could have spending on Luminar between April 2012 and April 2013?
We've done not an inordinate amount of time, and you shouldn't have to, right? If you've got the right people in place, they should be able to take it forward. and we certainly did. But I think what we did and still do is we review the progress of the business. We had a meeting yesterday where we looked at where we are year to date with Luminar, and how does fourth quarter look, and revenue prospects for the quarter. Are we going to make our goals for the year? What about 2014? What are we planning to do in 2014? How are we going to do things differently? Are we going to bring new people in, etc.? So there's a review that is that's taking place at least on a quarterly basis, and of course I talked to the chief strategic officer whose office is next to mine. I'm in constant communication with him, and if I'm not talking to Franklin, I'm talking to Esteban, who's the chief strategic officer, and he's giving me information as to Luminar, what it's doing. Plus, I'm seeing every day, how Luminar continues to integrate into our core business.
What kind of advice would you have for your peers at other traditional companies trying to figure out how to move forward with these technologies?
I think the best advice I can give anyone is to you certainly have to look at the information that's available. You've got to trust your instincts. You've got to have the right people in place. You have to have confidence in those people, and you have to go forward with the thought that, or the plan, if you will, that this may not turn out the way we anticipated, but something's going to come out of this that's going to help us, grow our business, in the future. And I think that more and more today, media executives need to be looking at their businesses through that lens.
And you've got to respond to Wall Street, right? I mean,
Sure.
Frankly, how do you help him respond to Wall Street and its kind of constant push for data that's going to show if you're going to move the numbers, right? Is that something that you feel is on your shoulders as well?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a responsibility to our shareholders to grow the company. And therefore, as that, we have to provide the metrics and the key performance indicators for the business so that Wall Street knows what to measure against. Walter has already started mentioning Luminar in our earnings calls.
I started talking about Luminar on our investor calls and with investors maybe 6 months ago. So what's happening is we're getting more questions from investors. They want to know more about what's this new business you've launched. They're interested. They see, they like the innovation. They like the fact that we're not standing still, because they know that nothing's standing still, right? You've got to be moving, and you've got to be changing, you've got to be innovating. And so we're doing that, and it's all positive. You have to be able to certainly show results as you go down this path of innovation, which we are doing.
Walter, Franklin, thank you for this discussion about how you're using analytics to transform your business. And I want to thank you for being with us. I'm Michael Fitzgerald for MIT Sloan Management Review. Thanks, and we'll see you again soon.